Hello and welcome to Celebrating Cinema. We're here for a special. I'm joined as always by Hugo.
Hey everybody.
And instead of Kiriko and Tom, we've got Jérémy Trouilh and Fanny Liatard directors. How are you guys doing?
Hi, thank you for talking with us.
You can probably tell from my attempt at the French accent, that's going to be the topic of today's podcast. We're going to be talking about both your feature debut, Gagarine, as well as sort of the representation of Paris in cinema. But perhaps you can give us an introduction of yourselves.
Hello, thanks for inviting us. I'm Fanny Liatard, and with Jérémy Trouilh, we are a duo of directors. We have been friends for a long time because we met each other when we were 18, because we entered Sciences Po in Bordeaux in the southwest of France. At this time, we didn't know we would make film, and we started to study political sciences. The studies were very interesting, I think, because they opened us to the world. And we spent our second year of studies in South America, where we discovered magical realism in films, and also that's maybe how we discovered a bit Paris in cinema, because we discovered Léo Scarac's films, and we fell in love with Mauvais Sang and Les Amants du Pont Neuf, and we found it beautiful because it's a vision of Paris, the famous monuments, the metro, and everything, but also a very original way to show it with very special characters, like not made for the world. We really loved it. And then in 2014, with Jeremy, we arrived in Paris after some travels, and I was living in Marseille at this time, and Jeremy was studying in Ardèche, and that's how started our story with Paris and its suburbs, because at the very beginning when we arrived, we discovered Ivry-sur-Seine, Aubervilliers, the cities around Paris, and that's how we met Gagarine, also the place where after we spent 7 years to make a short and a feature film, our first feature film.
Tu crois qu'il peut vraiment décider de démolir?
Je sais pas, Yuri.
Je vais vivre aux États-Unis. Mon cousin, il habite là-bas.
Je vois pas l'intérêt de partir au bout du monde.
Tu veux faire quoi, toi?
On se connaît depuis tout petit, tu me factures pour 30 €. C'est pour réparer la cité, c'est pour nous en plus. Gagarine forever.
It tells the story of Yuri, a young 17 years old man who grew up in Gagarine, a huge housing project in the south of Paris. And Yuri is really attached to this building of 400 apartments, because the people in this building he grew up with are his family, his community. And it gives him strength to be among this community, but the building is promised to be demolished. And Yuri enters in resistance to try to save this building next to his friends and his community. And one particularity that this main character has is that he's quite a dreamer, and actually he dreams of space. He looks at the star, maybe he dreams of being an astronaut. And this imaginary world he has in himself, he is going to transform this building as a spaceship. He's going to become, little by little, this astronaut trying to save his spaceship from falling down. So this is the story we told, and we told this story because we wanted to make a step back or a step aside from the usual stories we hear about and we see when a movie takes place in a project. Usually you will see a story about drug, about violence, with very little hope.
Great, thanks. What was sort of the first films of Paris that you were introduced to, or what kind of films remind you most of Paris, and that romanticized version perhaps that we're more familiar with?
Well, if I can add something on a link to Paris, and it could be an answer to your question also. If I go back in my early days when I was a kid, I grew up in the countryside in a little village in the southwest of France. And for me, Paris was exclusively linked to Disneyland Paris. And I went maybe twice during my childhood to Paris, and every time it was the trip to go to Disneyland. So For me, Paris was this fairy world where you could meet the heroes of the Disney movies. And of course, one of the big Disney movies that we know are Les Aristochats and Le Bossu de Notre-Dame. What I mean through that is that it's also been the first movies I've seen in my life, the Disney ones. I guess it was a quite enchanter vision of the world, those films, and this vision of Paris. And growing little by little, I learned some more complex sides of the world and of the cinema and the way you can look at the world through cinema. But still, Fanny and I, we are touched by the Disney movies and by even though you can question a lot of things they tell, because they are sometimes very I don't know how to say formatted, but still we have an emotional link to those movies. So
I mean, if you're into the magical realism as well, that's a thing that you can also really see in the Disney movies itself. I guess that there is a kind of shared quality between maybe, Marquez and Disney, even though that's a very generous read of some of those Disney films. But it's very funny that you say that, Jeremy, because my formative experience of Paris was also in Disneyland Paris. But the thing that I remembered most of it is actually the American cowboy shows of Buffalo Bill, which they did with, real life Native Americans, which is the first time that I ever saw those as a child, and like cowboy shows and stuff. So my Paris experience are mostly American colored than anything else.
Another film which I think really marked us and was talking about Paris and made the world tour. So I'm sure you know it. It's Amélie Poulain.
Amélie a soudain le sentiment étrange d'être en harmonie totale avec elle-même. Tout est parfait en cet instant. La douceur de la lumière, ce petit parfum dans l'air, la rumeur tranquille de la ville.
Which is really the portrait of Paris center, very magic also, but we loved this film, and it shows a lot of Paris, even if it's a bit naive and so interesting. And I don't know if it's at the same years, but La Haine was also a movie we saw as teenager, and we loved
C'est
it.
l'histoire d'un homme qui tombe d'un immeuble de 50 étages. Le mec, au fur et à mesure de sa chute, il se répète sans cesse pour se rassurer. Jusqu'ici, tout va bien. Jusqu'ici, tout va bien. Jusqu'ici, tout va bien. Mais l'important, c'est pas la chute. C'est l'atterrissage.
But I don't know why, for me, La Haine was not really talking about Paris. It was talking about the suburbs, but it could have been in other cities of France, because I grew up between Grenoble and Marseille, and I knew in Marseille it was really the same reality in the suburbs. So I find it beautiful to have these two faces of a same territory, Amélie Poulain and La Haine, that are films that really are amazing both, but they're not talking about the same reality.
Yeah, it's kind of like a tale of two cities, which is something that I always find when I am in Paris myself, and I'm wondering what you think of that. Also, when you were not from Paris and going there for the first times, how did you yourself just really interpret the city? Because I'm always kind of dumbfounded by the big contrasts in the city. Just like in London, I have the same thing that the city just seems so inapproachable for some people and just so welcoming to others. There's just this huge contrast. And how did you experience that when you went to Paris for the first times, maybe as young adults or when you became a little bit older?
Well, so for me, I arrived in Paris when I was 25 years old. Well, Fanny also. We arrived quite at the same time, almost, after our studies. And now I live in Marseille, but it's quite recent that I moved to Marseille. So I spent 7, almost 8 years in Paris. And I think my vision of Paris, of course, evolved quite a lot between the beginning, the first days over there. Mostly because when I arrived, I lived in the 5th arrondissement, so a suburb on the south of Paris, quite residential, very beautiful, but quite rich and difficult to access. I felt it was yes, this big, rich city. I saw it this way at the beginning on my first days. And I lived with 4 roommates in an apartment, not so big. So it was like looking for space. And every time I would go outside, I was always going to the same places, you know. So Les Halles, the Great Mosque, because it was a beautiful and peaceful place. La Tour Eiffel, place is quite touristy. And really it took me time to understand where I would feel more at ease. And little by little, it took me years almost to move from this first apartment and get to a suburb that would become more homey. And so it was 20th arrondissement and Belleville. And Belleville became my home for years. And there I felt that social mixity was maybe more possible, even though it's a suburb that has a big gentrification going on and it's transforming things and it's putting the poorest out of the suburb also. But still, when I arrived there, I felt I was more able to connect to the territory because it was more specifically walkable and talkable. And when I was in the fifth at the beginning, it was a big Paris, and everything was frightening somehow. And
Yeah.
arriving to Belleville, it became more a village-like. Sorry, it's difficult to talk about a link to such a big city and
Yeah, it is. No, but that's kind of like the interesting thing about a city like Paris, right? That you always try to grasp it and then it never really works because it's too big to grasp. You know, there's too many realities, too many multitudes all coexisting at the same time. You know, I'm reminded of what you both say by this Les Miserables, the recent film, where at the beginning of the film you see the kids using the public transportation to go to the city center and, you know, to celebrate the football match that France won. And it's just such a big travel for them to go from the banlieue to the downtown Paris city center. And it already immediately establishes that these are both Paris, but then there's a huge distance between them that they physically have to cover to be in that city center or something.
In fact, yeah, I would say Paris is not so big in comparison to other cities. Like now we are in New York, it's out of any scale, no? But Paris is not so big. If you you ride a bike in Paris, you can cross it in, like, I don't know, maximum half an hour. But the invisible borders are huge, and that's the complicated thing. And also, which is difficult, is to, I don't know, to find your own village in your own scale. And I think people can live together well at a small scale if they know each other. And so that's really what we found a bit in Gagarine, in Ivry-sur-Seine. Ivry-sur-Seine is still a communist municipality. I don't know if this has an impact, but they work a lot. For example, the elected people, they really live in the city. One of the mayor assistant was living in Gagarine. So he would cross every day the inhabitants. So there is this possible scale which can really create links, cultural, social, political links. And when you arrive in Paris, I feel you have to find your and to create sometimes your own village. So Jérémy was talking about Belleville. I felt also arriving in Paris that it's really a working city. Like people are really working. Many people are ambitious, and so you have to find your own place in this system. And we were lucky with Jérémy to start to make films in Paris and to have the opportunity with this reason to enter different territories, create links in territories as Ivry-sur-Seine, as Gagarine, because we really felt at home in these suburbs, because we had a political project there. It was a film, but it was also a very important political objective to show another image of the suburbs, and what we made with Gagarine, it really gave us a reason to spend time in suburbs like Gagarine and meet people and work together. So then for me, after 7 years in Paris, I feel now quite at home, which was impossible at the beginning.
And what do you think of this kind of like end of an era feel of the Gagarine neighborhood itself? Because it reminds me a lot of some big neighborhoods in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam as well, that are really modeled after, you know, communal living apartments from the Soviet Union. There was this huge utopian idea in the 60s and 70s to make these big high-rise buildings and then have a lot of people live there, so you can kind of have cheap, affordable living for the community of the future. And now, you know, your film beautifully shows as well that those kind of places, well, maybe that just the government failed those kind of utopian ideals, and they literally have to destroy them and build something more modern, more contemporary in its place. Do you feel like this kind of utopian ideal that's behind them can still exist, or is it slowly disappearing?
The time we spent there in Gagarine, of course, there's the tragedy of the past utopias that are falling apart, and many people living in projects in France and I think around the world feel sometimes abandoned by the state, struggle with difficulties on the economical and social level, of course. But we also meet, if you spend time in these communities, a lot of beauty because of the cultural diversity that exists there, because of the strength of the solidarity that links the people, and a youth that is full of dreams and that needs to be recognized as the future of our society, because utopias for the future, they have plenty, but they just need to be listened to and to be helped to grow. And so when you ask me, or when you ask us, do you believe that utopias are still possible today? I think we would answer, I don't know if they are possible, but they are necessary. For a society to be able to make people live together, you need a plan. And the plan is more than a coercion project. You need dreams, you need common dreams, and this is utopias, and utopias are serious. It's projecting how we're going to live together in the future. And so yes, of course, we hope that even though the utopias of yesterday didn't work, we can still invent new projects for the future.
That's super interesting. And I wanted to ask as well, like you said, many of these films that are set in the projects, or many stories told from the projects, are, you know, about these kind of like standard narratives. And I'm wondering, when you were developing Gagarine and you maybe approached people to convince them of your project, was the first association immediately La Haine? And did you actively need to convince people that you were not making La Haine 2 or a film in that same vein? Like, how badly do people want to see those films instead of the films about the dreamers and the idealists that you have in your film?
To be honest, many people understood very quickly that it's important to tell other stories about taking place in the social housing project as Gagarine. I don't know, I felt like many people are smart about that. When we were talking about La Haine or Les Misérables, they are really films we loved. We think they have to exist, but it's so important that not only this image of the suburbs is existing, and many people who we asked money for developing the films, they were understanding this, because I don't know, there is this necessity of protecting the youth also of these suburbs. It makes sense, it's clear. Of course, sometimes it was more about Yuri's character. His personality sometimes could look a bit naive or a bit too sweet, and some people would say, "Oh, a young man is too naive." And we had a bit to fight about that, but we were so convinced. And also during the writing process, we saw Lazzaro Felice, the Alice Rohrwacher film.
Oh yes,
Yeah,
fantastic
which
film.
we loved, we really loved, and we were so happy to see such a naive and sweet character in Lazzaro. And we felt the film is so strong, and it's like a tale also, a bit like Gagarine is. So it gives us strength to affirm that we want to show a young man like that, because they exist, of course. It's not the archetype of the guy like a bit powerful and tough, and he grew up in the suburb, but he's one of the many. He's inspired by many young people we met in Gagarine and in other parts. And yeah, we love this character, and even if he's a fictional one, he really takes his roots in reality.
Maybe I can add something to the question of what did the people expect. To be able to write this story, we spent years next to the inhabitants. They became friends, and to try to feed the writing of the fiction, we did different workshops with some of the inhabitants. We did a documentary workshop with people of very different ages that had grown in Gagarine. And we did a fiction workshop when at the end, we wrote with 15 young people from 12 to 20 years old, a short film called Sarah Come Back. And none of the stories that had been told by the people who attended the workshops were about violence or society collapsing or drug dealers. The group of young people, they decided to tell the story of a young girl who's fond of K-pop and who's mocked by the friends in the high school, and she runs away to the forest, and the group of young people try to find her back. So it was really about identity, who I am, what do I want to do, and assuming what I want to do. So quite a very modern vision of identity and society. Those are the young people of Gagarine who created this story. And on the documentary level, many people decided to tell a story about their origin, about their daily life in Gagarine, about their taste about music. I mean, this is what the people expect to tell when you give the opportunity to tell their own stories. So yeah, it's just to go on the same direction as Fanny was saying. People are quite clever and originals about the storytelling they expect when you come there to make a fiction. They don't all expect an action movie.
I think this kind of links to my next question, how you sort of dealt with this responsibility of telling a community's story and the outside perspective you have, but perhaps the fact you're trying to bridge them and the suburb area with the wider community. And I liked also the book ending of the film, the starting with the archival material from Gagarine itself, and also the end, hearing from the residents themselves. Perhaps you can tell us more about that, but I think it was a really nice decision to sort of let that be the final words of the film itself.
We were not from Gagarine, but we arrived quite naturally in this territory. It's not easy when you live in this territory, and every time someone come with a camera, it's to speak badly about the place. And many times it's to say true things about how bad the building is going. But people living there are integrating this bad image, and they suffer from it. So when we arrived, we had to go several times and take the time to talk to people. And very quickly they understood the project, that we were not a media coming to speak badly about the place again. For us, maybe it was a special time in Gagarine, because people were starting to learn that they would have to leave the place. And we used to say it's like if it was the end of a love story. Everything is getting more intense, and the association in the neighborhood were, I don't know, like raising again together, because the inhabitants they needed this community rebuilding. And we arrived in Gagarine at this time. Like the context was this one. They had built a house, social house, like down Gagarine. And that's a place which was really important for us because we spent a lot of time, what Jeremy told about the workshops with the inhabitants, we made it there. So all the people that were interested in videos, movies, and the film we were preparing could come and we would meet them. And so little by little, with the generosity of the people, who is really, really important in Gagarine. And yeah, this difficult story of having to leave a home, which is something really universal, even if it's in the suburb, in this place. We could all understand this difficulty coming. So all together, we really created beautiful links and strong relationships with inhabitants. And so we of course we couldn't make this film alone, coming from outside, but we really, I think, made it in the film, in the collective scenes. All the inhabitants you can see are people, former inhabitants of Gagarine. And sometimes they were also at the other side of the camera. They had different roles. It was beautiful to work with them. And that also the cinema team who arrived in Gagarine had to adapt to this context, because we are really entering an empty space, an empty building with many memories of the former inhabitants in each apartment. We shot the scenes, and so it was quite intense. And to answer also about the archives, and first we love to be surprised at the editing process, in the editing process, and looking for archives really is part of this mixing support that we like. And it was also really important to bring the part of reality of this fictional story we tell, the story of Yuri. It was really important to bring these little pieces of reality, of melancholia, I would say also, because there is something very melancholic, very nostalgic in the fact of leaving the home after so many years of utopia, of living together. So that's what we wanted to bring with the archives. And we had the chance to discover this 1 hour archive of Yuri Gagarin coming to inaugurate the building in the 60s.
Yeah.
We found it at the end of the editing of the short film, and for the archives at the end, where inhabitants are talking about their life. And we made a podcast in France while we were making the film. A friend of us, she made a podcast. She asked a lot of things to people working on the film, former inhabitants, and they talked like that. And it's so beautiful, and it resumed very well. We were really happy to have this material and to be able to put it in the movie.
And how did you find like the cast of the film? Because with the short Gagarine, Yuri is played by a different actor than in the feature version, which is Alsani Bathili, and it's his debut role as well. So I presume you maybe also he lives also in the Gagarine housing.
So it was challenging, of course, after years and years of writing a script, to find the real people that would become our characters. For Yuri, we were hoping, of course, at the beginning of the casting process that we did with Judith Chalier and Aline Badian, two amazing casting directors, to find him in Gagarine among the youth. So we looked for him. We met a lot of young people who had grown in Gagarine, and he wasn't here. So it went bigger and bigger at the scale of Paris and also suburbs. During 6 months, we met hundreds of young teenagers, because we felt that he couldn't be a professional actor. Yuri was 16, 17 years old in the script. We felt interesting to have a new face. And finally, Alseni Batili, who was in high school at this time in the suburbs of the north of Paris, wrote us an email after seeing a flyer of the casting in front of his high school, and he was really willing to meet us. And this is the first good point when you have a young in front of you that who wants to participate. Sometimes it's not like that. This willing was a very first important element of our meeting with Alseni. And from the very first steps he took in acting, he had never acted before. There was something very strong in him. Something. He's quite an actor, actually, like a natural born actor. On the other hand, when we met him, he didn't really match with the character we had imagined. Yuri in the script was more teenage like looking somehow, thinner, maybe a little more fragile. And Alseni arrived with this hero body already. He's quite an athlete. And at the same time, he had in his look, in his smile, something of the childhood that stayed there. And this contrast, this duality, is something he brought and that gave a lot of strength and credibility to the character, I think. And so, yeah, we felt really, really lucky to have him in the team. And he's a brilliant actor and an amazing person. And we love him very much. And we're very lucky to have met him. Something funny is that, so he's not from Gagarine, but during the shooting, his parents came to visit. And we were shooting in Gagarine, actually, in the block that was completely empty and at the point of being demolished, but we were able to shoot inside of these walls. And Alseni's father, when he arrived there, was quite emotional because he remembered that when you arrived from Senegal a few decades ago, the first place where he stayed just after arriving from Senegal was Gagarine because he had a cousin in this building. So yeah, there was a nice destiny surprise somehow. Fanny, do you want to talk about the other cast?
Yeah, I can tell you a bit about the casting of Diana, the Roma character. It was a complex casting because at the beginning we really wanted to meet a girl and to choose an actress from this community because for a long time, really close to Gagarine, there was this big shanty town, big on a horizontal field, and it was really impressive to see how these two precarity of housing could live so close, one from each other, one very vertical, the other one really horizontal. And to be honest, the relationships between these two worlds were not so good or were not existing really. So we wanted in our film to create bridges, and also it's a community, the Romani, who are not really represented in the cinema, or it's quite rare. So that's why it was important for us. But it was quite hard to find a young girl actress who would fit the character. So our cast director, Judith Chalier, she told us, "Oh, you should meet some actress more experienced. We was more experienced because you have to believe in the skills they have and how an actress can really incarn a character like that, even another culture." And when we met Lina Koudry, it was obvious that she was really strong and able to carry on some big emotional scenes and to also play with Alseni, who had no experience at all. So we kind of fell in love with her, and it was a great choice for us to work with her. And then around Alseni, Lina, Jamil, also McRaven, who had a little experience in cinema, and Finnegan Oldfield, Farida Rawaj, will kind of build a little family of acting. And then the rest of for example, the group of young people we see at the beginning of the film, they are all from Gagarine except Finnegan Oldfield, who is an actor. And I think they really brought a lot to each other, the experienced actor and the other ones, the inhabitants, with their experience of the space, the place, the territory. So that was a long process, but then a lot of joy during the shooting to work with all these different people.
And I'm wondering, because the film got released in 2020, or had at least a Cannes 2020 label, which is, of course, famously the festival edition that didn't happen physically. I'm wondering how the film is kind of following that being received in Paris, especially. Like, do Parisians like to see their own city reflected like this on the big screen? Or do they rather also just, look at other cities? Because for us, it's very interesting, of course, to see a film like this, or Les Miserables, or soon Les Olympiades, the ODR film will get released in the Dutch cinemas. So we really like looking at Paris and patching together the whole city through films. But what do Parisians think of a film like Gagarine?
Well, we can difficultly talk on the behalf of the Parisians, but
oh, you don't represent all the Parisians?
what we can say is that there was a joy for us and for the people of Gagarine that Gagarine, the film, was selected to Cannes because it gave a light on the film and on the story of this building and this community. So much light that the film has been sold in, I think, more than 50 countries around the world. And so it's crazy to say to the people who have helped us to make this film possible, among all the inhabitants, that their story, their very local story, has something so universal that it interests people from countries so different as Brazil, Taiwan, United States, Holland. I mean, it's beautiful. And at the time of showing the film in Paris, so first of all, we showed it very first to the inhabitants. There is a cinema very next to the former Gagarine. That is a local cinema, and we did a screening there with all the inhabitants. And it was a very emotional moment, of course, gathering the people who had not been together for years sometimes, and sharing this recognition all together. It was the very first impulse. Then when it has been released in Paris and nationally, it went quite well in the context because the context is difficult for cinema all around the world.
Yeah,
People have
sure.
not come back so much to the movie theaters. And in this strange context, I feel that Gagarine has been quite lucky. It stayed months in cinemas, and there's been quite a lot of people who went to watch it in the theaters. One thing I can add maybe about the link with Paris is that Paris is one of the few cities I've seen in the world where there are so many movie theaters. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful. And that was one of the best part of being Parisian, is that you have movie theaters everywhere, and very small and very big ones, and they show so many movies. And so for us, it was very special when it went out in all those movie theaters, when we went during years as a cinephile to see the films we loved, and then to see Gagarine poster in front of those theaters. Yeah, it was something very special that will, for our first feature, stay a strong emotion forever, of course.
Your answer, Hugo's question, sort of takes me back to a piece of dialogue in your film where you say celestial suburban areas. They are suburban areas around the stars. They shine less, but stars don't survive otherwise. And I think that's also quite a fitting way to think of Paris as a city. I think it's a really great line.
Thank you. We had the chance while we were writing Gagarine to be in a artistic residency in the CNES, which is the Spatial Studies Center in Paris. Many people, very interesting, many conferences about how we can live in space and how we travel into space. So we could go there and to the library in the CNES, and one time we found something about Les Banlieues Célestes, and we found it so beautiful. It seemed very, very important for us to think the city like that, to say that we are always the suburb of somewhere else. So
I think it's also a quote that kind of beautifully reflects on film itself in a way. It's kind of like the magic of cinema that also kind of adds to that.
Thank you. Well, one thing we can say maybe about that is that a challenge doing this movie, both during the writing process, the shooting process, and even in the editing process, was to find a balance between reality and magic somehow. And I think we found this balance through our main character's point of view. The movie begins with Yuri in his room looking at the outside world through this lens. And this is an invitation to adopt his point of view. And so this means for the way we shoot that at the beginning we are in the reality, and little by little, because he has to go deep in his dreams to find strength, to invent solutions in front of a reality that is more and more difficult, the movie becomes more and more sci-fi stylish somehow. And this balance is also a balance talking about a balance between a world that is falling apart and at the same time the willing of looking up in the sky and going weightlessness somehow. And this double state of a dreamy willing in front of sometime difficult reality is, yes, something I think Yuri believes in, and we believe in that.
I think that's a great note to end it on, and sort of this hope that more films like this can be made that sort of reflect the suburban areas of Paris in a way that want to be told, or they want to have stories that are told that are more reflective of their ability to dream. Thank you very much for talking with us. For those listening, Gagarine gets its release in the Netherlands. It'll be released now, actually, by the time you're listening to this. So we, of course, urge you to go watch. It's also got a wider release as well internationally. But yeah, thank you very much, Fanny and Jeremy, for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're so happy the film is released.
Well, enjoy the wider release, and we'll hope to see you with your next film, hopefully.
We're working on it.
Very well. Good luck with that, and have fun.
Thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.